We all started the same way. You lift it heavy as possible, and if you die, you die, but you lift that weight. You go in there, you have a job to do, and you don't stop till you get it completed. Each training session that you do brings you closer and closer to that goal that you're trying to achieve. If you look at my transformation from my amateur career, my back has been my weakest body part. So we needed to hit it a little bit more frequently. I'm doing, like I said, a 9-day rotation. So we can't leave the back for 1 day every 9 days, right? That's a little bit too little. So we needed to add in a secondary day to make sure that we're getting the frequency we need for the back to actually respond. So the first day has a lot of the compounds and heavy rowing. And then the second day is a little bit, we back off a little bit more on that kind of intensity and focus on like the squeezes and like the stretches and the contractions. We do 3 days on and then 1 day of rest. So the way it'll work is we'll do quads on 1 day, then chest, back, rest, and then we're gonna go shoulders, hamstrings, and then back day number 2, and then rest again. And then typically I'll have like an arm day after that. We do abs as well. I do abs typically after my cardio sessions 3 times a week, or during one of those lighter days, like a hamstring day or like an arm day. So typically that's how the rotation works. I hated it at first, but I like it now because one, not every body part falls on the same day. And then second, you get a little bit more rest in between, so it kind of helps. You have to treat training like a job. You don't want to be one of those people that the gym is your social hour, right? You go in there, you have a job to do, you have X, Y, and Z things to hit, and you don't stop till you get it completed. No matter how you feel on that day, no matter if you had a fight with your girlfriend, your boss pissed you off, you still have to go in there and deliver, because each training session that you do, it brings you closer and closer to that goal that you're trying to achieve. It's kind of been socialized a little bit with social media. So most people know when I'm in the gym, I don't talk to anyone. I go in there, I do what I need to do, and I get out, because for me, that's job number 2. It's not time for social life. Training specifically when you lift, there's also a neurological connection that you're establishing, right? So the first time you do a bench press, you're just trying to get that weight off your chest. Someone who's been doing this for a while is trying to contract the pecs as they are pushing that weight. From a bodybuilding standpoint, and when I talked about revamping my training last year in the off season, one of the things that I started doing was focusing on the negatives as well. The positive range of motion is pushing against the weight, right? You can push as much as you want on and use as much weight as you want, but that bar coming down, a lot of times people will just let that bar drop, right? And then focus on pushing it out. So we started focusing a lot more on the negative and the positive. So what that means is I'm pushing very hard, with against the bar. And as that weight is coming down, I'm trying to control it as much as possible. Dorian Yates said it best. The muscle growth is also in the negative portion of the rep. So you're getting 2 benefits against one particular exercise. And that's why you'll see that as bodybuilders progress, they tend to not lift as heavy as they used to, because they don't need to use as much weight to recruit the fibers that they need in order to grow. And that's something that I started to get to in my career recently, that I kind of noticed and I think was highly beneficial. So for people watching, that's something I definitely say incorporate. Incorporate the negatives in your reps of what exercise you're trying to do. You'll notice that there's definitely going to be some kind of benefit to that as well. You have to go through that first phase, because if you're just starting out and you're trying to do negatives on a rep, I don't think it's beneficial to have 1 plate against the bench and you're doing positives and trying to control the negative. Build to a point where you can bench 3 plates, and then you can start focusing on pulling the negatives back as well as the positive. Now there's a strength that you've built that you're now trying to refine. If I squat 5 plates every single day. What benefit am I getting from squatting 6 plates or 7 plates? It's not going to be the same, 20%, 30% increment of if I went from squatting 2 plates to 4 plates. It doesn't scale that way. After a while, the gains you're making based on the weights that you're lifting becomes more and more minimal. So you have to find ways to minimize the risk, but also still get the benefit that you're trying to get from muscle building. You have to go through that barbaric process first. You got to be able to put 4 plates on your back first and squat it no problem before you even ever think about trying to refine your lift. I've never met anyone that was strong that started out doing stretches and pause contractions. We all started the same way. You went to the gym, you lifted heavy as possible, and if you die, you die when you lift that weight. And then you get to a point where now it's like, okay, I'm at 5 plates. If I do 6 or 7, I'm probably not gonna walk out of this gym. I'm probably gonna go to the ER. So I need to start finding ways to make this long-term versus a short-term thing. And that's when you start to include that refinement. You need to have compound movements in there. They're hitting multiple muscle groups at one point. You're getting more bang for your buck per movement. So I typically would do at least 2 in whatever training, that I'm doing for that particular day. And then I would have maybe 2 or 3 accessory movements that go along with them. Isolations will typically be 2 or 3 movements out after the compound movements. What I like to do with isolations is I always like to start with an isolation movement to warm up the muscle, move to a compound movement, and then finish up with 2 other isolation movements. So for example, if you're hitting legs, you could start with leg extensions, right? Warm up the quads, let it get, fully engorged and whatnot, then move over to squats, and whatever I need to do, and then finish up and round off with, say, like a lunge or something like that for an isolation style movement. So combining them in such a way that it optimizes your training, you can't pick one and omit the other. You need to use both. Cardio depends on where you're at in your prep and how close you are to condition in the show. Preps vary. Each prep is never going to be the same. So it's hard to give a definitive answer, but I will say this. As you get closer to the show, and I'm talking like 5 days out, you do tamper away from the cardio because you need to bring the inflammation down from the legs. So what I would typically do is about 4 to 5 days out, we're done with cardio, so I can actually see the detail. We can see the detail of what we've worked on throughout the entirety of the prep. But in terms of the actual cardio regimen, that's going to vary depending on where you are, at what stage in your prep, and how conditioned you are leading into the show. Training in itself causes inflammation in the muscle. If you actually train heavy during the last few days leading into the show, you're actually going to blur your detail because the muscle itself is inflamed from, working that hard to get the muscular growth that you're trying to achieve. So leading into the show, keep it very light. And again, I'm not talking 4 weeks out, I'm talking like 4 days out, right? You keep it very light. You just want to get some blood in there so that the muscle's not flat, it stays alive. And then, as you get to the show, you make sure that you preserve the detail that you have. We typically wouldn't scale back on the intensity. What we may scale back is on maybe movements that may be a little bit more dangerous, because as you get closer, your joints, you don't have enough cushioning in your joints for certain things. So like a barbell squat, for example, a free barbell squat, you may want to move that to a Smith, right? Or like if you do, I don't recommend any bodybuilders do this, but like if you do like a flat bench press, right, in the gym, you may want to start using a Smith instead at that point, because you just don't have the cushioning within that connective tissue of the muscle to be able to handle that kind of impact. You get the pictures after a show or leading into the show, you're doing your check-ins with your coach. You kind of know where you're lacking and where certain areas are. After North Americans, I was peeled, I was shredded, but we realized like my front to back, The back just didn't have the same 3D pop that my front had, which means that I had less muscle back there. So we came up with a game plan that, the majority of the off season was going to be spent trying to build that back, because in the pro ranks, that's kind of the make or break factor, for a higher level pro, is, what your back kind of looks like. That was why we started incorporating a lot of the negatives, squeezing on the reps. I was one of those guys, I could row 3 plates in the gym. I would go barbell row 3 plates, but I wouldn't feel a thing in my back. My arms just kept growing because my arms were doing all the work. So we had to revamp a lot of that with training as well, which is why we kind of came up with that game plan structure of like revamping the training, increasing the frequency on the back days, and utilizing certain movements that make sure that I'm locking into the actual exercise versus trying to use, supporting muscle groups to move the weight. Animal for me, my introduction was in college. I had been like about 6-7 months, training in high school, and then going into college, training at the gym back at Rutgers. We had like a little crew of people back then. Bodybuilding was not popular like now. There was no social media. The guys who were carrying gallons of water were like the weird people. So there was a very, very few of us. And back then, the hardcore guys were all using Animal Pack. So if you want to be a hardcore guy, you got to be with that. You got to be using Animal Pack. So I wanted to be a hardcore guy too. So that was my first introduction to Animal. But I remember I went to the GNC store back down in Piscataway, which is not too far. And I remember getting my first Animal Pack and opening it up, and I looking at the pill. The pills were like this huge back then. I was like, damn, this is hardcore. I'm gonna be jacked. So yeah, that was my first introduction to Animal, and then ever since then, Animal has been very, very symbolic in the bodybuilding and powerlifting community. Pictures of me wearing Animal shirts back in college, because if you're a hardcore guy and you trained hard, you rocked Animal. That's just the way it was, and still is today. All my shows up until very recently, it was just me and my girlfriend, most of the time for most of my shows, nationals, whatever, it was just me and her. And then, Andrew and Sid came along, which were my coach. And now, it's my core group that has always been with me, but now having Animal, another family that's being attached to that, so it's almost like, just from my end, as an outside perspective looking in, you started this thing where it was just 2 people, right? They were just doing this thing. And now you have this family that's just like growing and supporting into this one cause. So it really means a lot to me. It really, really means a lot to me, because when you're starting out, you're not as big or as muscular. It's very hard for people in your corner, in your circle, that are not doing this to understand why someone would pick that path. They don't see the vision of where this thing is going. And when you finally start to live up to that, it's a very, very great feeling to know that the sacrifices that you've made up to this point are paying off, and that there are people in your corner that are willing to support you and give you that love and give you that sense of connection to this one thing and this one passion that you've had your entire life. So it feels great. It's a very full circle moment for me, to be quite honest.